Welcome to the TTS Talking Early Years podcast. Each week, we'll be joined by educational experts from across the globe, offering exclusive insights, inspiration, and guidance to help practitioners unlock the potential for learning in the early years. Hello, my name is Mark Loveday, your host for this week's TTS Talking Early Years podcast. I'm the headmaster of Fruin College, an independent co-educational day and boarding school for students aged 7 to 19, specialising in dyslexia and co-occurring specific learning difficulties. I'm a specialist teacher at SLE, Specialist Leader of Education for SEND, and I've taught across primary, secondary and sixth form in both mainstream and specialist settings, holding a variety of different leadership roles. I've previously set up and led SEND advisory teaching services, been responsible for the creation of diagnostic pathways for dyslexia, dyscalculia and dyspraxia, and created and led an alternative provision for students experiencing emotional-based school avoidance, which won Alternative Provision of the Year in 2023. I'm also a board director of the SBLD Assessment Standards Committee and a trustee responsible for SEND for a multi-academy trust. Throughout this series, we'll be discussing a range of topics aimed at supporting SEND in primary settings, inspiring you with guidance and resources to enhance your practice. I'm delighted to be inviting Dale Pickles back for our kind of final episode today. Dale, how are you? Good to see you.
I'm good. It's getting towards the end of the day, getting a bit tired, but I really enjoy podcasting, so I'm up for this.
Brilliant. I'm looking forward to it again. The previous three have been fantastic conversations going back and forward. So I'm really looking forward to this one. Before we just get started, could you just do a quick recap of who you are for our viewers?
So I'm managing director of B Squared. B Squared are a company who break curriculums down to smaller steps so we can always show progress. So for early years, we have broken those development matter statements down. If you're struggling with in the birth to 3 zone, we've got that into small levels so we can identify where children are working, identify barriers so we can target interventions and support, also show the progress they are making. And we can do this showing progress all up to age 25. And we've got loads of other stuff as well. I also host my own podcast, so called the Sendcast. And I'm up for this because I love learning and talking about special needs because there's always a new thing to learn, always a new way of looking at something. And being on a podcast is just, I get to dedicate time every week to learn.
That sounds amazing, doesn't it? And it is, none of us know everything. And I think it's those connections that you make, isn't it? And that learning that you absorb from others and those conversations that you have that really make you think differently and shape who you are as a practitioner, as a professional. So today, it's a roundup of our 4th and final episode together. They seem to have just flown by. We will focus on how to support children with neurodiversity and offer effective ways to aid their learning. So focus really in terms of support. There are many things classroom practitioners can be doing. They often have many things being bombarded at them. But other things that we can really drill down on and focus in terms of not only helping our young people with ADHD, but also helping the class as a whole.
So first thing is, if a child say they can't, or they're struggling with, or you can see they're not producing that work, when they say they can't, believe them, accept they can't. It's not they can't forever, but right now they believe they can't. And if you try and dismiss that belief, you're only going to break that barriers down and kind of destroy that relationship between you and them. You have to accept them where they are. If they believe they can't, then right now they can't. But it doesn't mean you can't help them to be able to do it. So that's the first thing for me, is accepting and believing them when they say what they can or can't do. Whatever your beliefs in their abilities, you've got to accept them where they are and then help them move forward from there.
Yeah.
And it sounds like a really strange thing to say, but for me, in my education and watching my children have theirs, people kind of dismiss when they say they can't. It's just dismissed.
Yeah. And don't you think it comes back down to that is visible and that is not? So, if we were to liken that with someone with a broken arm and saying, I can't write, it wouldn't be questioned.
Yes, it is, because it is that invisible. And also, Well, because I can, see you can. If everyone else can, you can. Problem is, if everyone else can and I literally can't, might be because I believe I can't or I'm not fulfilled. Whatever the reason, in that situation, I cannot.
Yeah.
And we then have to unpick why. Is it anxiety? Is it a lot of time it can be anxiety. And I remember my daughter, we were going to get a takeaway and I went to go to one place. I said, oh, you go grab this from the other one. I gave her the money. She just had to say, pick it up for pickles, nice and simple. And she burst into tears. And she was mid-teenager. I couldn't understand why. And I said, I'll get it. It's fine. I'll get it. I was like, what's the worst thing that can happen? Thinking they might not have heard her or misunderstood, or they might say, we don't, whatever. And her response was, I might have walked in and fallen over. So she catastrophized the situation, which gave her a huge block on being able to do something. And she knows it's unrealistic. She knows it all. But in that moment, that is what she believed, so she couldn't. And I had to accept. And then we worked on how to avoid that, how to kind of work on that in the future. But you have to accept. That's the biggest thing to start with. Don't dismiss, accept.
Absolutely. And like you say, even in those situations where we almost got that catastrophizing of a situation, it is too easy to go, oh, you're just being a bit silly. It's not going to happen like that. Because like you say, it's the worst possible thing you can say to someone.
And you can go the other way. So if this is the worst thing that can happen, what's the best thing that could happen? So you could go the other way to help them see that it's a real spectrum of things that could happen. But
again, that's a supportive comment, isn't it? It's not a judgment. It's believing them, and it's trying to then turn that into, okay, let's have that kind of growth mindset here. Yes, that could happen, but what is the best thing that could happen? Could happen as well. I mean, just feeding off what you just said about anxiety, really. I mean, we know the impact of heightened anxiety on our working memory, and we know that causes us some issues with working memory. It decreases its kind of productivity, its effectiveness. What can we do in the classroom to be supporting that working memory?
So again, emotions are the biggest thing. So you've got to kind of bring those emotions down. And somebody said to me, attendance is a really strange thing, because if they're in the classroom, we class them as attending, even though if they're anxious, loads of stuff going on, they're not really present, they're not learning. So bringing those emotions down, and we mentioned co-regulation before. So it's teaching them how to manage their emotions, and if they are anxious, things they can do to bring that down. And it's bringing that emotional state down is probably the biggest thing you can do out of everything. Out of all the things we will talk about, that emotion is the biggest thing. And with working memory, and you mentioned before about offloading it.
Where
if they're struggling with it in their head, how can we offload it? Yeah. And is it a case of, if you're giving them 5 steps, rather than verbally saying it, can it be written down somewhere so they can actually refer back to? So I don't have to remember when I finished 1 and 2. What was 3 again?
Yeah.
It's how can we lower the demands on them with that memory?
Absolutely. And kind of building those visuals as well. So, that having that potential, that writing, but also that kind of visual image. And, I often say to teachers, that's going to help all students, because if you've got someone who's off task, or someone who went to the toilet and came back in during that moment, you've got a visual on the board that you can actually, in front of them, even better. That can actually, help support that engagement and that kind of task management, that offloading. The thing I would say is, I think teachers often get hung up on visuals, like we've got to buy in particular software. Google Image and AI creators now of kind of images is fantastic. It's doing a copy and paste job.
Definitely. And one thing I would say is consistency and certainty are 2 big things for all neurodiverse. So having that structure is, if you've got that visual timetable, it should look roughly the same, not just in your class, but every class. It's not, we do it sideways in this class and vertical in this class. Or when we write in our books, in this class, we do it this way, in the next class. We need that consistency. We need that rules, not just within a classroom, but across the whole school, so that when they go from one teacher to the next, they know they have that certainty. They're not anxious about what's going to be different. They walk in there and go, visual timetable's the same. This is the same. It's going to be similar. It's, again, that all impacts that emotional, but that certainty is really, really, really big. And we know from various things that when we know what's going to happen, we're calmer.
Completely. And I think that feeds directly in as well to the huge issue we've got around, emotional based school non-attendance as well, and the reason why it's extremely tipping towards in terms of prevalence secondary schools, because that certainty does significantly change at transition from primary into secondary. And I think we also, in terms of that working memory, we're seeing offloading. It's about that whole brain engagement, isn't it, as well?
Yeah.
And things like multisensory learning being a big part of engaging that full element and this full core foci area within the brain to maximize that output.
Yeah, the more the more senses involved with learning, the more it embeds and learns and remains, and you keep it going. The more interesting it is. The multisensory teaching, amazing person called Dr. Susie Nyman. She does it at college. So it isn't multisensory is something you do all the time in early years. You sing songs, you're doing the phonological awareness, you're doing all of that in early years. But as we kind of move up, we lose those senses. But
completely,
we should bring them back.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I mean, Susie Donna, she blows your mind. She's brilliant.
She is.
If there's anything you can get on kind of YouTube, I would say to the people watching this podcast, go and view her. Even better, go and see her speak, because she is thoroughly engaging. Like you said, college. There are so much multi-sense that can be brought into secondary schools. I mean, I see it every day. I mean, I'm head of a dyslexia school, and multi-sensory teaching is exactly how we teach our mainstream curricula here at Fruin. And it's really exciting just to see. But, for me as a teacher, isn't that more exciting to be teaching in that way rather than just here's your exercise book?
I'm going to try and avoid going into curriculum and assessment review stuff here. But hopefully, if we can reduce the amount of content in secondary schools, so there is more time to actually learn what's there, we can make it more interesting. And we can also change it from just, here is the stuff you need to know, to actually, like we're having here, a conversation about it, that you're hearing other things, and you may have to do kind of debating on things but stuff which engages their learning.
Absolutely.
Turns those brains on.
Completely. And, I think we come back to that, not to focus on it, but we talk about these buzzwords in education, but quite often they're thrown out without an awful lot of understanding behind them. If you had to give classroom practitioners 5 top tips, what would you be thinking of in terms of making that learning accessible and supporting our students with ADHD, but also that kind of wider range of neurodiverse needs?
So the first bit I'm going to go straight to is, and this is something that isn't just educational, this is everything in my life. I generally learn everything explicitly. I can't kind of learn something while doing something else. So I didn't learn how you have conversations just by being a child. I literally had to focus on how to have a conversation. So generally, how to socialize, I learned explicitly how to socialize when I was 16 to 20 or so. I learned how to have conversations. I didn't naturally pick it up. So there are lots of social things you have to explicitly teach. But when you're in the classroom, if you're implying something, it won't be picked up. So we talk about clear, concise instructions. We mean being explicit, so not open to interpretation. So if I say, all right, see, we've had a whole big discussion, and I just say, open your books and start writing. You haven't told me which page in my book. You haven't told me what to write. I haven't made that connection of what you were just talking about is what I'm supposed to write down, or there might have been It's how explicit are your instructions? Are they interpreting it? And are they interpreting it wrong? So my nephew, was design a pencil case. It was his homework at secondary school. So he didn't know what to do. So my sister went, just Google pencil case. He did, found an image, write it down. Why did you choose that design? Don't know. Another one, his homework was find out about volcanoes. He went and read a book about volcanoes. And they came back and, well, where's your work? You told me to find out. You didn't tell me to find out and write down or write this or prepare this. You told me to find out. So he did. So sometimes what we mean and what we say are very, very different things. That biggest thing, I've got to start straight away with being explicit.
Yeah, great, completely.
My next one is to help focus, to help children not be distracted, is the front of the classroom should be quite plain and boring. Because that way, when you are standing there, when you are there with your whiteboard or whatever's going on, my attention is drawn to you. If the teacher's desk is against that class wall, that front wall, with loads of stuff all over it, I'm probably counting how many pens are in your pen pot, or aren't working out that 4 of them are the right way up, but the rest of them are all upside down. When you're not looking, I'll turn them all the right way up. I'm not focusing on the bit you want me to, because there's lots of things I can focus on.
Yeah.
So think about, where do you want their focus and where do you not want their focus? Think about that. Movement breaks. I'm someone who, I don't stand up, but I will kind of move in my seat. But a movement break can be them just walking around, but don't just think because they're not holding a pencil, their head isn't working.
Right.
So my nephew got in trouble in primary because he was asked to write a story and he kind of just sat there for 10 minutes. But what he actually did was he watched the entire story in his head before he wrote it down. So he might be walking around, watching this story, seeing how it's going to end, and at the end, he'll write it down.
Yeah.
So don't think of movement breaks are there to distract. Don't think movements there are for a negative reason. It might help them think. My daughter at university walks around her room while she's thinking. If it helps them think, what's wrong with it?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's just that conditioned classroom practice, isn't it? That's the problem.
But they've got to do it respectfully.
Yes.
So generally, maybe we'll go to the back of the classroom where you're less distracting. But if they need it and you're allowing them, but you're kind of going, look, can you just do it this way? But can you kind of not distract people if you can? So just quiet. You should be able to reach an agreement that you're both happy with.
Completely. It's adapted learning spaces, isn't it? Then it's a minimal change with maximum output.
Next one I do is supporting them with their emotions. So if maybe you've asked them to do something, they've misunderstood, they've got it wrong, or they feel what they've done isn't good enough, then that is a truth. That isn't good enough. You can't say what it is. There might be a reason why they think it's not good enough. So unpicking that, but supporting them around their emotions. So helping them maybe recognize their emotions, helping them kind of, if they have that emotion, how can they what are their options in managing that? So it might be when they're angry, rather than blurting out, is maybe having a walk, having that movement break.
Sure.
There are lots of things you can do, but you need to help them learn. So again, like I was saying, they won't watch other people or somehow intrinsically know this is what I do when I feel like this. You have to do that explicit teaching.
Absolutely.
So that help them learn, not just that academic, but that emotion. So when you're feeling this is what I do. So give them options on what they can do. And positive reinforcement. Now, it sounds like we all say, we all do positive reinforcement. It's what we always do. But when there's a child not doing the work, when there's a child disrupting others, when there's a child not getting the work, when there's a child doing all of this, it's hard to still be positive.
Yeah.
Because for some children saying, you can do this might be the right answer. So saying positive things might not seem the right thing to do. And it is always interesting. Generally, every time someone comes up with the rule of this is a rule, I'll break it with another example of why it won't always work. When I give you a rule, you'll break it with another rule of why that won't work either. So it is always going to be each individual situation. But if you are thinking someone is neurodiverse, or you know they're neurodiverse and they're struggling with something, there will be a positive somewhere. It might be, although they haven't finished the work, they got more done than yesterday, or they went in with a more positive. Yeah, they came in today. Yeah, you had a setback yesterday, but look, you've come in. Let's see what went wrong. Let's work on. But it's having that positive, supportive conversation can be so powerful.
Absolutely. And I think, if we then turn that around and go, those 5 top tips, I couldn't agree with you more, Dale. Absolutely, 100%. What do they cost? So when we're talking about, SEND crisis nationally, etc., schools not being able to support, those top 5 tips cost nothing, and yet can maximize the output, maximize the outlook, maximize, at that child's fullest potential, helping them to believe, to aspire and go on to achieve as well. Like, fantastic. It's, I think we could just keep going on and on. And I appreciate we run out of time often on these things, like we have done now. I mean, 2 big ones on those top 5, amazing. Thank you. And the big one coming through all of our podcasts together, all of the episodes, is teaching emotions, being explicit, and really get that's come across really loud and clear. And sadly, that brings us to the end of our final episode, Dale. I just would like to say a huge thank you for joining us and for providing such valuable insights and top tips. You've been listening to TTS Talking Early Years podcast with me, Mark Loveday, and Dale Pickles. If you've been inspired by our conversation today, don't forget you can sign up via the link in our episode notes to be the first to hear about future episodes and access exclusive follow-up content, including ideas for your settings and links to relevant resources. Thanks so much.